My guest is singer-songwriter Aaron Lee Tasjan, the genre-busting pop genius craftsman whose latest album, Stellar Evolution, is now making the rounds on best of lists for 2024. Aaron is a celebrated force in the Americana scene, but his music defies categories. At once organic and electronic modern, his songs skillfully soar with irresistible hooks and insightful lyrics. For me, personally, he is one of my top 2 music discoveries of the last 10 years. Why? At first it was the melodies and distinctive voice that evoke artists like Harry Nilsson and Tom Petty. But as you get into his lyrics, I think they're even more clever than Nilsson. He's also got Petty's directness and ability to grab your heart, ear, and feet at the same time. But Aaron Lee Tasjan is his own thing, and his legions of admirers include jaw-dropping names like Elton John and Cheap Trick. I was grateful to spend a few hours with Aaron, including a sound check at the Purple Building, Todd Snyder's Nashville club. What a treat. And in our chat, Aaron touched on probably most of the themes I've set out to tackle with this podcast. First of all, he's got an amazing origin story. Writing, recording an album in his bedroom at age 12, soon graduating to solo shows at a local coffee house, and as we'll detail in part 2, finding an unlikely industry-connected mentor at his Orange County Middle School. This is the meaning of grind and flow, y'all. The grind of putting in your time, then getting whooshed into overdrive by the flow of the universe. But much of that will be in part 2. Right now, in part 1, we'll talk about performance psychology, finding your own voice, and dealing with anxiety. I think Aaron has a winning and unique approach to self-talk that's helpful in giving yourself the grace we all need. So right now, let's spend a few worthwhile minutes with Aaron Lee Tasjan.
So a broad question that I like to start off with is, who are you and what do you do?
Ooh. Well, who am I? We were having this discussion last night, actually, around the kitchen table at a late dinner after the show, sort of talking about the idea that in the modern context of social media, a lot of times as artists, we're kind of told, it's like, just go on there and show people who you are, which is sort of impossible. And even in real life, it's really hard to know somebody fully. I don't think you can. Humans are complex creatures by nature, contradictory, and all of these things. It's the nature of humanity. So I think it like that question is harder to answer for me as time goes on, because I feel like I continue, to be surprised myself even by who I am, and things that I didn't think about, or I thought I didn't like, or, parts of myself that were sort of in the shadows, or I wasn't consciously aware of them, sort of come out more as I get older. So I'll just say, I'm a human. I'm a person of the planet Earth, for better or worse. And what I do is try to tell my story about my experiences in my life in a way that will allow other people to find their own voice within the context of that, and relate to all that we are as people.
So what's your vehicle in doing that, in your medium?
I've chosen songwriting and performing as my medium, and the songwriting part is really about the inner life. I think that's the goal of songwriting, is to sort of share your inner dialogue that you're having, that you don't always outwardly express. It's funny how those sorts of feelings and expressions are really what people relate to in a song more than anything, because a lot of that stuff is hard to say out loud just in the context of a normal conversation. So when you do that in a song, it can be really powerful for people because they get to see themselves in that, and they feel a sense of relief almost of
It's not just me.
exactly, you know.
Right.
And then, you know, in terms of the performance element, I think that is, you know, we were talking a little bit, having some conversation as we were setting up around, you know, the sort of mental state that one enters, you know, into as a performer. But for me, I think it's a courageous thing to do. It's a very vulnerable thing to do. There's always the chance that you could fall off the tightrope, you know, and in a live performance context, there really isn't a net at the bottom to catch you. So I think that for me is, you know, a way in which, you know, I can express the idea that we're going to fall, and we're going to embarrass ourselves, and we're going to find ourselves in these situations that are less than ideal for maybe how we would wish others to perceive us. But it's really in those moments that we're making a much deeper and more valuable connection with each other, because we're sort of looking at the parts that are hard to look at and being able to have empathy for that, and use it as a tool to show that it's okay. And I think in the context of art, it creates an opportunity for people to see each other, you know, and to feel seen by what someone else is sharing in that way, in the artist-listener relationship.
I was interviewing Brendan Lee, a wonderful songwriter.
Yeah.
And she said a big turning point for her was when she went from, oh, hey, look how awesome I am, to, oh, I get to be part of this club and I get to share this with other people. In your journey as an artist, you're saying the quiet parts out loud. Was there a transition from, okay, look at this cool thing that I made, to having to actively try to connect with people? Does that track?
Well, yes, in a different way for me. I suffered a lot as a kid. A very, very, very low self-esteem, like to the point where, you know, it sort of worried my parents, and you know, they were sending me to psychologists and you know, people like that as like, you know, as early as like 10, 11 years old, because I just really was down on myself, you know, a lot. And I would never be, you know, vocal about it in school or to other kids or stuff, but I would come home just feeling, you know, like an alien, really, you know, just like I didn't fit in, and I didn't know if I had any friends, and I was just kind of always turning it all on myself. So when music came along, it was something for me to feel good about myself. There wasn't really. I've heard people like John Mayer say like they had this fantasy of like, you know, they'd be practicing guitar in the room and they would have this fantasy that one day at school the kids would discover they were an amazing musician, and instead of being this sort of like nerdy, you know, smart kid or whatever, they would suddenly be revealed to be this cool guy, you know, who could play guitar like Stevie Ray Vaughan or something like that. Like, I never really had those kind of thoughts about it. It was more like it was a very self-soothing endeavor for me. And you know, from 12 years old, I was at home, you know, in the morning before school, immediately after school, with my 4-track recorder, learning how to play the drums, learning how to play the bass, playing multiple guitar parts, learning how to play the piano, singing harmonies with myself on initially songs that I just liked that were on the radio, you know, 1979 by the Smashing Pumpkins or something. And then also, you know, I got the record, well, when the Beatles, that was around the time that the Beatles were sort of having their like second wind with the Jeff Lynne productions and all that stuff. And McCartney put out a solo album called Flaming Pie right around that time, and I got that record, and it was hugely inspiring to me, to where I was like, I want to try to do this. So I wrote like 10 songs, and kind of in that style, I guess, and you know, recorded them all and made a little album just for myself, not to even, you know.
How old are you at this point?
I was 12.
Wow.
And at one point, I worked up the nerve to show it to my dad, you know, and we were driving around in his car, you know. I'd made a little cassette tape of it, and he had it in the car playing. And the first side finished it, and he was like, Aaron, I got to tell you, you know, my dad was always very honest with me, you know, and he said, I got to tell you, this is actually pretty good.
Okay, so it was soon after this that Aaron found a mentor in his Christian school's music teacher, a professional musician with substantial credits playing with Earth, Wind & Fire and others. From this teacher, Aaron received priceless tutoring on recording, songwriting, and performing as part of his everyday school lessons. For an aspiring musician, this is akin to winning some divine lottery. But we'll get into the weeds of this in part 2. I think it's interesting to chart young Aaron's progression from his bedroom to playing 2-hour sets at a local coffee shop and beyond, even before high school. But we're going to jump ahead to the ways his newfound self-expression did and did not improve his self-esteem.
That was really exciting to me, because my experience in school was that I wasn't smart, and that I wasn't good at sports, and that, you know, I wasn't, you know, in art class, I wasn't making, you know, the thing that the teacher would be like, oh, that's really great, or whatever. You know, it's like, there wasn't, I just kind of felt like, I guess I'm just kind of nothing, you know. And then suddenly with this music thing, I was able to like put this work into it and get this result that made me feel like, oh, I have something to contribute, you know. I have an ability to do this in a way that makes me feel good about myself, and even better, it seems to make these other people feel good too. Like, what a precious situation to have found.
So basically, you found your thing.
Yeah.
With music. So how did that, of the long run, help the self-esteem? Or was that a temporary fix, and you still were having to unpack things?
Well, yeah, you realize, you know, at first it almost seems like the solution. You know, it's like, oh, this is my thing and this is my place in the world. But, you know, you sort of find it's like, you know, even when you find something like, you know, like I found like music, you know, as a young person, and the longer you go on with it, and I think this is true, you know, of songwriting as well. And I've heard, you know, songwriters I really revere, like Jason Isbell, say this. The longer you do it, the harder it gets to do, you know? It's not one of those things, you know, where it's like, oh, now that you know it, it's easier, you know? It's like, because it's something that is sort of continuing to unfold, and there's these layers that you are discovering, and it's really a journey of self-discovery. And so, you know, you sort of figure out over time, like, oh, it's not the destination, it's the you know, the trip that you take to get there, you know, that sort of thing. So, you know, through my successes and failures, you know, as a performer and a songwriter and all that, as a kid, I sort of found that to be the case. And I found that, just because I had this beautiful experience where I was feeling more connected to myself and more connected to the world as an artist, that didn't exclude me from, the things that we all have to go through and work on as humans throughout our lives. And, you don't get to be immune to any of the hard parts, and in fact, as a person who's sensitive enough to create all of this stuff, it might actually be harder for you in certain ways than it is for folks who find ways to numb themselves by just going to a job every day.
Right. And speaking of the bad stuff, the hard stuff, I've heard you other places discuss how you deal with anxiety.
Yeah.
And you have a very unique perspective and a unique relationship with anxiety. Tell me about that.
It was something that developed over a long time because I've sort of always been a very anxious person, and for a long time I didn't really even understand what that was, but once I started feeling more comfortable sharing it, like in therapy and stuff like that, I sort of figured out it's like, oh, it's kind of an affliction of sorts that people suffer from, and there's all kinds of different ways to deal with it. But the place that I eventually got to with it was like, I'm okay, instead of trying to beat this or get away from it, what I'm going to start doing is inviting it in and actually having a curiosity about it, and empathy for it, and try to treat myself like I would if I was the parent talking to a little kid who doesn't understand, all of this yet, and have a gentleness and a kindness with myself about it. And that's, even having that intention, it's hard to do sometimes because anxiety is so intense and can send your brain spinning, in all of these directions where you're like, almost overwhelmed by it, and there are things that you can do in those moments, breathing exercises and what do they call it?
Centering.
Yeah,
down.
exactly.
Box-
Yeah,
box
grounding
breathing.
and yeah, exactly. All of these things, and there are so many different ways to do those things, but for me, personally, what I've found is and accepted is like, this is something that is a part of me, and at a certain point in my life, I began to feel like I think I need to be done with hating parts of myself that I don't like. I've spent a long time doing that, and I don't think it's served me, and I don't think it's serving me. And so I don't think you can ever, flip a switch and just move on, oh, I've decided now, Right. But you can set an intention to where when this comes up, you become this observer of what's happening, and you get a little distance from it, and you're also able to like treat it as we were kind of saying earlier, with some kindness and some compassion, and to me, that's really what I think of when I think of self-love or something like that. It's not some level of confidence or, I learn how to cut my hair in a way where everybody's like, oh, he's really looking good. I think I like this guy a little more than I used to, or something like that. It's about looking at the parts of myself that are hard to look at, and finding a way to view them without, entering that critical voice and that harsh thing that we do to ourselves sometimes, where we're like, I should be, why can't I,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. I mean, those are such pointless questions.
Or I'm bereft of ideas.
I'm bereft of ideas for what to do with myself,
Right,
you know?
What's some specific self-talk? I've heard you also mention that. Like, you're very kind to anxiety as another aspect of you. You got some very kind words, like specifically. Walk me through that. What do you say to yourself?
Yeah, I kind of, go like, oh, okay, yeah, hey, buddy, I know why you're here. You're trying to protect me. And I get that. And I see that. And I'm thankful for you for trying to do that for me. And then there's also times where I even go further and say, like, I am so appreciative of that, but I don't need that right now. Like, I've got this, and I'm not saying that you have to go away or not be the way that you are, but I just want to let you know that I can do it, and I don't need you. I release you from having to do that for me right now.
That's powerful. And how long have you been? How long ago did you come to that aha moment? You tried that approach.
Yeah, probably. Probably about 5 or 6 years ago. But it's really taken that long to be able to set the intention for recognizing it in real time and then being able to kind of like execute some of those moves. And it's something that I would say at this point I seem to be able to do maybe a quarter or a third of the time. So I'm getting better.
Right.
My average is improving.
Right.
In certain ways, And when I think when I would reflect back on my life, a lot of times it was the mistakes that I'd made, things that I thought I could have done better, and keep you up at night, kind of like all of a sudden is like, God, why did I, when I was 18 and I da-da-da-da-da, why did I ba-ba-ba-ba-ba, or whatever. And I sort of figured out at a certain point, it's like, that's useless. I still want to be able to reflect back, but I think a more useful exercise when that thought enters my mind would be to think, yeah, but I don't really do that anymore. I did do that,
Right.
and I'm not proud of it.
Right.
But I don't really do that anymore because I grew out of it.
That's a wonderful realization and something to remind yourself.
Yeah.
With that anxiety, as we wrap this up, specifically towards performance anxiety, is it different? And what advice would you have to others, whether it's, even if they're not a musician, like public speaking or any kind of performance anxiety, some in the moment ways to talk yourself down off the ledge?
When I was 16 years old, I got invited to play a sort of a musical competition and seminar in New York City called the Essentially Ellington Competition. And it was a national competition for high school-aged jazz performance students in the context of a big band based around the music of Duke Ellington. If your band, some of them were high school bands and some of them were just sort of all city, or whatever type bands. And if you were chosen, they took 15 bands from all over the country. You went to New York, you performed at Avery Fisher Hall, Lincoln Center. It was adjudicated by Wynton Marsalis and Victor Goins and
No pressure there.
yeah, like the greatest living jazz musicians in America. And you performed some of Duke Ellington's music, and you got to sort of interact with these adjudicators and get feedback from them on what you were doing. And a lot of them were professors at places like Juilliard and stuff like that. So if you were thinking, I might like to go to music college, this was also a great way to learn what you needed to work on for the next couple of years to be able to get to that place. There were 3 Aarons in our band, the Columbus Youth Jazz Orchestra. Me, Aaron Holbrook was the alto saxophone player, and the piano player was a kid named Aaron Deal. And we were 3 people in the band who definitely took it very seriously. Kind of like, it wasn't like the one time that we thought about it was when we were at the rehearsal we had once a week. We came to that rehearsal, having worked on the music that we were meant to play, but then also having gone over to each other's houses, on the weekend or whatever, and like, hey, let's see if we can play, Giant Steps by John Coltrane or something like that. I'll take the melody and you play the accompaniment, and then I'll switch to the accompaniment and you take a solo, kind of like those sort of things, just working stuff out. Anyways, there were awards for best band performance and there were awards for instrumentalist performance. And I have it right here. I won the award for outstanding soloist on guitar, and there's, you can see Winton's signature there at the bottom. And what was interesting about that, I was the only guitar player at the entire competition who didn't take a solo. Because in the context of big band music, the guitar wasn't really a soloist instrument. The solos were always played by the saxophone or the piano or a trumpet or, in certain cases, trombone or something like that. The role of the guitar was to be part of the rhythm section and to play these block style chords like Freddie Green from the Count Basie Orchestra. And it made the music swing in this very special way. You were part of that thing. And when you were doing it right, it really made the music float, and have buoyancy, and feel very free, and it made you feel something as a listener, more importantly. And I think because I sort of inherently understood that as part of the music, they gave me the award because I was really doing what the music called for.
Serving the greater whole.
Yeah, more so than look at what I can play,
Right.
As a soloist or whatever. And so that was an important lesson, and getting to be with Winton, who was someone that I revered, greatly, and that my dad revered, greatly. And he said to me one time, he goes, "Don't be a great practicer, be a great player." And what that meant to me was, you can spend all the time in the world that you want working things out in your bedroom. But what you really want to do is get yourself as much time on a stage in front of an audience as you possibly can, because you're gonna trip and you're gonna fall down and you're gonna do all of those things, because being in that performance space completely changes everything about what you're doing, mentally and physically. It's a totally different situation than when you're in solitude by yourself working something out, and you might be able to really get it so that you can play it perfectly. But man, when you get up in front of that audience, it's going to be something completely different, because there's all this other energy suddenly that's involved, and all that's kinetic,
So you're hitting on something I've had a lot of thought to recently. What do you do with that energy? And are there any, like in the moment, like in the heat of battle, how do you?
Well, much like anxiety,
Right.
You know, it can cause a lot of fear.
Right.
And the way you win is to invite that fear in, you know, and sort of like the Will Ferrell movie about the NASCAR driver, Ricky Bobby, you know, towards the end of the movie, when she talks about he's kind of getting together with his former assistant, Susan, you know, from earlier in the film, and she talks about, you know, you're Ricky Bobby, you know, you use the fear to drive what you're doing, and you wrestle it to the ground like a demon cobra or something cool like that. But that's it. You know, you realize, you know, the scary parts, you know, the things that that make you uncomfortable are the places in which you're able to grow from and translate something that is actual real magic. And what real magic is using the physical and spiritual, energetic things around you to create something that you can't physically touch. You know, like a great concert experience that you are able to give to an audience member, where it's like, it's not something they get to hold, it's not something that they ever get to possess outside of that moment, but the feeling that's created and the experience that's created as a result of witnessing something like that goes on in the person's memory forever.
Wow. And I think we need to wrap up here, because I don't know if it's going to get any better than that. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you, Chuck. Thanks for having me.
Don't stop now. Check out part 2 of my interview with Aaron Lee Tasjan that, fingers crossed, should be available now. We'll get into a 12-year-old's journey from the bedroom to the stage, and later, a bold decision to quit a successful band on the verge of touring with Lady Gaga and surefire MTV stardom. In the meantime, please be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app and subscribe to us on YouTube and the Instagrams. Thanks so much for listening.